Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Chris Feeney with me. Chris is the sales engineer for the channel for IGEL here in the United States. Chris, how's it going?
It is going well. It is Tuesday, almost close to hump day, so it's already been a full week. So excited about today's topic, though. It's going to be awesome.
I've got to travel tonight to New York for a meeting tomorrow and then back tomorrow night. It means back to normal a little bit for me where I have 14-hour days, 2 days in a row. And I'm excited about it because I'm just excited to go somewhere and do something.
So did you get the whole shot thing? Are you all vaccinated or not yet? Or I know what's the story there?
Well, I got the virus a couple months ago and it hadn't been that long ago. So I think I'm good for a little bit, but I got it the old fashioned way. And it wasn't a big deal, to be honest with you. It's light cold. I'm for one of the most of the fortunate people who don't have a really bad, horrible experience. So I got that, and then I think I'm going to start looking into getting some vaccinations when I get back. So we'll see. If I'm sick as a dog a week from now, we'll know what happened. So we got Seb with us. Seb is a leader in the IGEL community. Seb, do you have an actual title in the IGEL community?
What do you mean by title?
Did they officially call you something like the Grand Poobah of IGEL community, or?
I like this one, to be honest.
That's a good one.
I think Doug's probably.
I love it.
We should get Doug you probably don't know what you know what the Flintstones are, Seb?
Yes, definitely. Sure.
Yeah, we should get Doug a Grand Poobah hat for IGEL community, and from now on we'll call him the Grand Poobah of the IGEL community.
That's right. This is nice. This is the Moose Lodge of whatever he puts there.
But that does still leave open the idea we got to get Seb a title. Sure, you don't have a title in the IGEL community?
No, I'm reading it right here. I can read it for you, Seb. It's pretty impressive. Director of Community at IGEL and IGEL Community Fellow, all uppercase, by the way. So that's pretty important, right?
Just call me Seb, please.
Well, what's really impressive is we're sipping coffee, and I stepped away to go fill one up, and Seb holds up this French press, but he's sitting in his car. And I got to admit, when IGEL at our kickoff, they handed out these French press things, right? And I've never done a French press, but it's a good cup of coffee if you ever do it. It's not that difficult either. A few minutes and fresh coffee right there. So.
Honestly, it was, so the topic for today, right? But this coffee stuff reminded me during the disrupt. So we got a kind of little package from IGEL. We have a one-time meeting every year where all IGEL employees from the world are meeting together. Obviously, this year not in person, but more virtually. And we received a coffee tasting set. I don't know if you got the same coffee sorts all across the world. Yes, we did. Cool, great. And we received a little Bordeaux French press. And it was the first time I noticed, okay, that's right. There was so much difference in coffee and coffee beans that I restarted to love coffee. I drank a lot of coffee, but more for the caffeine, less for the for the taste. And now I'm buying a second French press just to test some other kind of coffee beans. So it's getting better and better.
It looks complicated, but in reality, it's really like brewing tea in a sense. But the flavor is amazing. And I remember when Starbucks had this thing called the Clover. It was like a robotic French press, and if you watch them make this thing, they put the grounds, they freshly ground it, and then they suck basically all the stuff out of it, and it pops up in this little. The end result is like this coffee bean, looks like a brownie. You don't want to eat it, obviously, but then you get that cup of coffee, and it's pretty amazing. So I'm a huge fan of the French press, whether it's a robot that makes or the manual approach. But that's not why we're here today.
Before we go there, Seb, I appreciate the commitment to doing this, and maybe your car is the best sound environment you have. Why are you in the car again?
The short story is we bought a house about 6 months ago, and we have a lot of workers at the moment. So I guess last time when we met, we received new windows. And this week we are getting a new heating system and new heaters. And I asked the guy, can you make something which is not noisy between the time of 3 and 4 o'clock? And they said, fun fact, No, it's definitely the part where we have to do some loudy stuff. So I have to move into the car again. And yeah, feels like a second house right now. So I have my coffee, my French press, my cup of coffee, a laptop, my microphone. Feels a little bit like in my home office.
You know, it probably does make a pretty good sound booth, though, really.
I can't hear any work being done. So it sounds pretty good to me.
Okay, that's good to know. Then I will just close my home office door, which will happen, let's say, in a couple of weeks when the house is over, and I will just move into the car. That will save a lot of money.
Yeah, you should just work from the car. Work from anywhere is now work from the car.
Exactly.
So on that last story, so there's a new partner up in Canada, small, but they're building. They got a Ferrari or Lamborghini, excuse me. And they call it the Lambo project, and they're putting a Citrix SD-WAN dual LTE signals in this thing to make it a Wi-Fi hotspot, but they're using the Raspberry Pi as part of this project, and it's sort of this ongoing thing, but they're going to make that the world's best mobile office. So very cool. Andy, we should probably come up with something like that and pick a car. I'm a Corvette fan myself, so.
Yeah, no, we're actually giving away a Bronco to an actual customer, not having a really exotic car that we buy for ourselves to drive around and put a Raspberry Pi in. I would like not to get started on that particular topic. I think that's a real dorky technical guy thing to do, but
it's a total geek project, but it's pretty cool. But anyway, it does involve Wi-Fi, which is sort of the conversation we're about to move into, right? Good segue.
I'll sum up that last conversation with, you know how many customers I could take to Synergy with the money I could spend on a Lamborghini for myself? Yeah. It's not where my head and where my heart, and I emphasize heart, is.
Hey, I'm not suggesting it. I thought it'd be pretty cool, but if we have money to blow.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I've actually had people ask me why I don't buy myself an expensive car, and I'd rather take customers to conferences. Would be my answer. Nonetheless, so Seb, you were nice enough to point us to a blog that you wrote recently about how to get metrics, download speed, Wi-Fi signal monitoring from your Teleworker IGEL devices. And this is really within the IGEL ecosystem. We're probably going to allude to the idea of how to do this outside of IGEL or in addition to IGEL. But you want to give us some insight into why you wrote this article?
Yes, definitely. I would start with the introduction, why we did that in which context. Because to be absolutely honest, we started that regarding a session that we will hold with ControlUp. So with Trent and Ty from Canada, we spoke about a few things that we are doing in scripts locally inside of IGEL just to get some metrics. That means perimeter, that means download speed or some other stuff from the endpoint reported back into the UMS. Just to show how, between marks, complicated it is to do that through a script. And ControlUp is delivering this kind of metrics more or less out of the box. And that was the idea, to make it a little bit more interactive and not only showing PowerPoint side, but more showing how can we do that in Linux locally with a few comments, and how is ControlUp dealing with that on an enterprise level scale. So that's the reason why we started with that. And during creating that script, I was thinking, hey, it would be great to share that with the community, because not everyone is willing to pay some extra money for getting that kind of metrics. Sometimes they just needed one shot, one-time information, and not getting a historical perspective or graphical view or all that stuff. So the goal is not to steal some customers from ControlUp or Liquidware, etc. Not at all. It's just saying, hey, if you just need basic stuff, you can maybe have a look into that script that we created for the community. So that just a little, let's say, disclaimer from my side. It's an absolutely different perspective from what a company like ControlUp will do. But that's what we are trying to achieve. So let's imagine, and I guess the period where we are at the moment is the perfect time for that, maybe a year too late for some of us, but customers are moving to home office, to teleworking situations, and sometimes the end user is complaining about poor performance. poor performance of a session, of a website, of a specific component that he or she is using. And we have so much different places where an issue can come from. It can be on the terminal server side, it can be on the unified communication side, it can be on the plugin side, it can be on the endpoint, it can be on the headset itself. Long story short, I tried to gather a few informations that the support can look at if a customer is complaining about a specific behavior. And
Hey, Seb, can I comment real quick?
Please.
So as an old school help desk troubleshooting guy, number one thing, right? If you're having issues, plug it in, right? Let's plug it in. Let's see if the issues go away. And then we know how to kind of walk backwards into, all right, now what's my Wi-Fi related challenges that are causing delay? And as you guys know, end user experiences. So look, and I've said this multiple times, probably on this podcast, maybe, we're taking what normally would go across a little wire from the graphics card to the display, and now we're putting that on the network, translating it on the way out and back on the way in. That's a magical thing that even works at all. We need optimal network speed to have a great experience, but Citrix and VMware and Microsoft and others have done such amazing things to make it a good experience, even on a not great network. In other words, latency of a certain amount, bandwidth of a certain amount. But as you're pointing out here, we really need to understand the Wi-Fi scenario is because the world is becoming more and more wireless. And this, your blog here about how to learn more about what is actually going on when you think it is network related. Just kind of want to set that up a little bit.
I would just add one thing that I had, because I was a support guy for, I would say, about more or less 10 years. If you have performance issue, it's never the network. In most time it is, but from the network guy's perspective, it isn't. So that was just a little side note from mine. So yeah, let's start on that. So I would just try to explain before going to the script itself or going into the topic too deep. Just wanted to share one thing, because all the stuff we're speaking now about is related to the so-called UMS Structure Tag. The UMS Structure Tag, I mean, it sounds complicated, but it isn't. A couple of years ago, something like 6 years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we introduced the UMS Structure Tag, which was meant mostly to help people deploying endpoints into the networks. And after the automatic registration process, move them automatically in specific folders. So we created we used a DHCP option 226 that we called UMS Structure Tag, that you could use in your DHCP scope to say if the device boots up, get the DHCP address. It will also get from that scope a specific information, just a string like building 1. And in your UMS, you can read that DHCP tag and move the device in a specific subfolder, which might be called then building 1. So just to give you a short introduction about what the UMS Structure Tag is and how you can use it until now. Most of our customers are not using it at all. They don't even know the existence of them. Some of them know, but are not using it because they are using the default directory rules by default. So using IP address ranges or whatever else, but mostly IP address ranges.
So Seb, real quick, when a structure tag, you can put it on the device itself, but what you guys are doing here with this DHCP option is you're systematically giving the devices that boot up a structure tag that can then be leveraged for tracking and understanding where the device is at and where it needs to be placed in UMS? Exactly.
Okay. Exactly. That's an extremely good summary about my last 20 sentences, more or less. But yes, that's exactly true. So that's what we are doing there. And since we are not using it so often, we are now using it in a couple of scripts, in a couple of situations to bring an information back from the endpoint to the management suite. And that's at the moment the only way without using the REST API to write something from the endpoint to the UMS.
Yeah.
I will just go a little bit deeper into that topic a little bit later on, and I will tease some information that we might get in a couple of weeks or months. But yeah, let's start there. So
Seb, in this case, a user, and I use the singular user, is complaining about a slow Citrix session. or maybe it's a pocket of users. And why I use the singular there, or maybe a small group, is because if one user or one group of users that all have something in common are complaining, but the rest of the organization isn't, then we know we probably don't have a system-wide issue. We need to go figure out what's going on. Maybe we have them plug it in, problem goes away, unplug it, back to Wi-Fi, now the problem's back. And that's an example of what you would troubleshoot and jump into here with the blog, right?
Exactly. So I mostly start with a Linux command that I'm Googling around, because I'm not the Linux guy that can write some scripts by himself just in a couple of seconds. So I just Google a little bit around. How can I measure the link quality and the Wi-Fi signal strength from the command line? And for that, there is a command called iwconfig, so ivconfig. And this tool is pretty good in reading metrics from your Wi-Fi chipset and from the network you're connecting to. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get all the informations which is gathered by the command iwconfig, and with the help of the command grep, just keep a small part of the huge information mass that you are getting back from that command in a couple of lines or a couple of words. So what I just want to get is a link quality in that case. And I'm taking that one and writing it back into the UMS structure tag field. So as soon as a device receives that profile, let's imagine the following. We have a profile. We have a firmware customization, custom command, and desktop. That's maybe where we should start, I guess. As you might know, the IGEL operating system is mostly write protected or non-persistent. That means that a script that you deploy to the endpoint specific folders will be gone away to 99% if you reboot the device. And besides that, you would have the issue that you would have to start the script on every boot up. How to deal with that? Would you do that with systemd, with cron? Don't need that. In IGEL, we have the so-called custom commands. So custom commands are commands that you deploy by a profile and that are executed on every, let's say on every boot up mostly, on specific actions, like please execute a script every time where the network state changes. Like if I move from Wi-Fi to cabled network, or as soon as a desktop starts. And that's what I'm using, and a lot of people at IGEL, for executing some command in a specific context. What we are doing here is executing a specific command in the root context every time where the desktop starts. You might think that it might be better to do that when the network is started. That's right, but let's imagine the following. The devices are not mostly just being a standard thin client from IGEL. They are laptops or sometimes some kind of tablet-like devices, which are connected by a network cable and a Wi-Fi. That isn't happening such often, but it might happen. So you might have a situation where the network is already started, but the Wi-Fi is not connected already, etc., etc. So the final network desktop command is, in my opinion, for that specific use case, the right one. Coming back to the topic, as soon as I got that information, I'm writing it back to the UMS by using the UMS structure tag. And that's what Andy, you are seeing now in the screenshot. It's the last part, so that's the public IP address. You can just go a little bit wider to the end. Yeah, here we go. That's exactly the screenshot we're looking at. So now we have the structure tag with Wi-Fi link quality and the signal level. If you want, I can just maybe copy the script itself and send it to the chat that we can share with our audience, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, we could certainly post it out somewhere if you want to post it somewhere, or people can know in the community, maybe better yet, to reach out to you and they can get a copy of it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the kind of metrics you are getting back into this UMS. Not saying that it will cover every use case, but most of the use cases I have seen on the market. And you're now looking at the download speed, which is quite interesting when it comes to performance issue debugging.
Yeah. Hey, Seb, is there anything in this that would allow you also maybe to get like packet loss? Bandwidth's important, speed of file transfer is important, latency is important. That can really drive end user computing nuts is packet loss. People like Citrix, VMware, they've done a good job adding UDP to their protocol, but packet loss can be a killer because it's hard to explain. It's hard to find. Is packet loss something that you could come up with using this technology, this technique?
That's 100% true. In that specific case, I would say you can already rely on a thing that we introduced a couple of years ago, which is called the debug partition and monitoring agent. I mean, that will bring us a little bit too far, I guess, from our today's topic, but just sharing a few insights. We have a debug partition, which is a feature that needs to be enabled in the profile that gives you the ability to track some specific use cases locally, like if a process is taking too much CPU time or too much RAM, or if you want to TCP dump, so capture network traffic from a network card. Obviously, you can do that with a script, but since, like I said, a couple of versions, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, we introduced that debug partition quite silently because it's mostly related to support and to devs, but it can be used for packet loss monitoring, all that kind of stuff. Just don't activate it by default because it can cause a lot of overhead on your CPU, but also on your hard drive and also on your network if you want to use it on every packet, etc. So use it with caution. Yeah. So Chris, any thoughts, comments on what Seb's covered so far?
I think it's, there's a lot that can be done, as you mentioned, with these scripts. And obviously, we have companies that sort of take that approach and then layer on, their look and feel to it or whatever, or expertise. And so I think it's just great to kind of show, hey, if I'm just looking for something quick and I don't necessarily have maybe an eval license for some of these other products that certainly will do a bang up job. But here's a quick way to kind of get a sense of it. So whether you have a help desk tool that they could pull up, and kind of get a sense of what's going on. Frankly, I'm going to try it out myself because I think I've got a Wi-Fi issue with my home router. Somehow the Wi-Fi just gets really slow or whatever, and I'm having to reset my router. And I'm not quite sure if it's the firmware on the router or just, I don't know. But I'd like to kind of get a sense of how often it happens. It seems it happens more often than it needs to, and maybe something like this will give me a good sense of how the Wi-Fi signal is doing. So,
and that's a good comment too. I mean, in here it talks about the speed test and the fact that we have 4G, 5G connections, which is great, which means we have most of the time extremely fast, reliable networks. That only makes it worse when it becomes unreliable and not fast. Because it's almost become accepted. Back in the old days, we immediately looked to the network and got in that little argument with the network guys and had to go prove what was going on. I have many stories about that. But these days, networks have become so reliable that when they do have an issue, it really causes an impact because we rely on them so much.
That's true. Especially if you're looking at, I would say, especially Germany. I mean, you could ask Doug about his internet connectivity in the last 4 weeks. You would be surprised how bad it can be to live in Germany regarding internet connectivity and quality. So that's definitely a pain at the moment, especially in this actual phase we're looking at.
And that's an interesting topic too, because your first world countries, the United States is a great example. We're finally at a point now where we're redoing all our networks, but our networks were so old because we had early adoption of all this stuff that we're finally getting to a point where the technology is new enough. It's time to completely replace everything. And so a lot of other places you go would have better internet access or better connectivity and better speed than we would have in the US. Because we were running on legacy stuff that was generation 1 or 2.
Interesting. Okay. Wasn't aware of that.
Well, not always, but we have plenty of good access here. I shouldn't complain. It's amazing what we have. But at the same time, you'll go places that are, 4 or 5, 10 years old in terms of the technology, and it's a step down only because it was an earlier adopter.
You're mostly using, I mean, it's lastly, part of the discussion today. Are you mostly using copper or fiber, which is the main connection in the US?
Well,
Can
let me
you,
give you
can
a
you
great
give us some insights?
So I was in Puerto Rico a couple weeks ago, and Puerto Rico had an earlier investment in wireless technology, not Wi-Fi, but wireless technology. And so they got the whole island, a big chunk of it, on 3G back in the day. Well, now it's legacy, and going there and being on 3G for a week felt like it was unusable. When a decade ago, that would have been amazing. Now I'm delivering higher, more rich content over a 3G, and I felt like it was a struggle. That would be an example of an early investment that hasn't been kept up to date. In the US, certainly we're using fiber in almost every place possible. And then at the local, maybe switch level, it's still copper. But even in those cases, I'm finding gig or 10 gig almost everywhere.
Man, sounds like a dream.
Well, that may be
We are
true.
far away from that here in Germany. I can tell you that. We are far away from that.
Well, and I don't go enough places to be able to experience what the rest of the world has to deal with. So maybe I'm just a naive, spoiled American. So, Seb, this section here where it talks about three things. Let's see. Is a server really offline from the endpoint's point of view? Now you have confirmation, and then you have these three things you jump into. Did we cover these three things specifically yet? I don't think we have.
No, we just covered the Wi-Fi ones. So we can just jump into the next topic because that's just the one you mentioned. It's the remote server monitoring profile that I used. I tried to cover the following use case. User is complaining that he cannot or she cannot connect to a specific server. Might be a WVD, might be a Citrix, might be an ADP server, whatever. And the first thing I would do, and besides the fact that I will look at the monitoring system to check if we have a wider issue, I would check, can the user contact the server by issuing a ping, an ICMP issue. To get that, you would first have to shadow the device. So, and the UMS through ICG, it's quite easy to achieve, but even you're not allowed to do that every time or everywhere. So you would have to connect to the endpoint, open a local terminal, which is not maybe available by default. So you have to push out a different profile, log into the root. Hopefully, you know the administrator password for your root user on the IGEL endpoint. And then you are able to start in a ping, or you have to open the network tool on the endpoint to issue a ping. Sounds a little bit complicated, and it is sometimes. So that's the reason why I created a short script, which do the following. So we have in the profiles that you can get in the Azure community, if I remember right, somewhere in a variable, an IP address or an FQDN that is checked on every network change. So I'm more or less issuing a ping and check if I got a response or not of that server. And that information is written back to the UMS in the structure tag. So let's imagine I have a test for a specific server, which might be, I don't know, the Google DNS. I'm not even sure if they are pingable everywhere, but let's say this one. So 8.8.8.8. And the system is checking at least one time on boot up, one time after network change, if the server is available. And if yes, it will write back into the UMS, yes, the server blah, blah is, the server 8.8.8.8.8 is available, is online. And if not, it will write back the same information, but with offline back to the UMS. So you get a first information about the fact, is the user able to contact your server farm or not? Is there something wrong with the CDN or whatever? That's something that you can cover there.
Hey, Seb, I would pause on that real quick. I would also highly recommend that people, do a DNS like ping www.yahoo.com. just so they can make sure DNS is working. I can't tell you how many times I've found that I was troubleshooting network issues, which were really, domain naming system issues.
Yeah, agree. That's one of the issues you might face, especially if you are looking at outdated DNS or local DNS taking over the global ones, and that's just a little step to check if something is not available out, and that's what I'm doing with that DNS script. So it's at least useful to get a first insight of a debugging step.
So, Seb, does that cover the second one as well?
Yes and no. The second one is covering the topic we just covered and another one. Let's imagine that we have a web server somewhere in the world, and I don't know if it's a CN or whatever, but I want to check after my user called me if I got a request from his client. So the first question I would have to the user is, okay, can you give me your public IP address, which in most cases isn't available to the end user, right? So you have to give him sometimes, at least in Germany, a website where you can log in and see, okay, that's my public IP address.
Right.
That's something that you cannot see at the moment on the UMS side. I mean, I guess it's on the road, but it's not implemented until now. And that's what I'm trying to get with this little comment. So writing back into the UMS a public IP address of the client, that gave me then the opportunity to check if this client tried to reach my web server, if he got a 404 or authentication failed, or maybe a geo DNS or IP issue, and that's let's say another information that I want to get from the endpoint or from the end user, without having him or her to check some websites to get that insight. Does that make sense?
It does. No, it's, for me, it's kind of this. These are all things I do with even relatives, right, who call up and want technology help from time to time. And you start with these basic networking things because they don't know, right? They don't know if they're on, even when they have a cable plugged in, they don't even know if they're on wired or wireless. And the minute you realize they're on some type of non-wired connection, whether it's wireless or Wi-Fi, all of a sudden that becomes a big factor in what you're troubleshooting, and you got to get these basic things covered, including, I can't tell you how many times I tell people to go to some type of download testing site just to give me feedback, because they literally don't know the difference. And look, this is the thing, we're dealing with work from home users now. I literally had this happen with one of my salespeople the other day. They were complaining that their spouse in the other room had great connectivity and things were working great. And then they were complaining they didn't. And they didn't really tie the two together. He was wired, they were not wired. And turns out there was just a lot of interference for the signal inside the apartment complex they lived in.
Yeah, I remember when the whole thing came clamping down, we had, kids working or doing school at home. I was like, anticipated heavy Wi-Fi interference, and I fired up on my Linux laptop. I got this application that will let me scan and kind of see what signals were out there. And as a result, I forced my Wi-Fi router to go to a higher end of the spectrum because I didn't see a ton of radio signals up there. And then I kind of monitored to see if that helped, with a lot of that interference. Because just where I'm sitting, I'm probably picking up easily 8 to 10 Wi-Fi networks. You see how powerful these antennas can be. So very interesting. I definitely do that download speed tester when I'm sitting there trying to figure out if, in my case, Spectrum is my internet provider, if they're, having issues, or if it's something else. But good stuff, Seb.
And guys, does this get better when we move to 5G and you're no longer even using a home Wi-Fi system and you're just relying on that little tower out by the road near your house? Or does this get worse? You guys tell me.
I wish I could tell you something about that, but 5G is such far away at the moment from where I'm living. But I guess it will change a lot of behaviors even on my side. I mean, I will definitely miss the private network stuff. But from the connectivity point of view, we are definitely leaving the copper situation at the moment here because we are limited to 80 Mbit down, and it's still reliable, but we cannot go higher. And the 5G is opening an absolutely new space of internet connectivity, from response time, latency, and bandwidth. I can't wait to see it.
So it's not going to be fair because I'm sitting in my office, and I'm doing a speed test right now in front of Seb, just so, I don't know.
Yeah.
Rub it in, I guess.
I think the 5G, I think, obviously the promise of it, right? I mean, you think about the economy that was built on 3G and 4G with LTE, and now 5G, will extra bandwidth really make this a whole moot point, right? I mean, it used to be like, are you on dial-up at home or T1 or partial T1 or whatever, and that certainly played a factor. And technologies erupted around, limiting based on the type of traffic it is. Voice gets priority over video or whatever, right? Will this even matter in the future? Because the bandwidth is just more than enough to cover these types of things. It'll be interesting to see. I suspect, they'll keep pushing the limits on what 5G can handle, right? If they can do a 10 megabit download in 2 milliseconds or whatever, then let's add more content. Let's make that 100 megabyte, whatever. So we'll see what happens. And I think the 5G signal is not as, I'm not an expert on the wireless piece, but I think it's maybe a little bit, they're going to need more towers, if I'm not mistaken, or more of these antennas around, because it's not as widespread as 4G or something like that.
But it just doesn't have the single strength. You're gonna. I think it's within a couple hundred yards. You got to be within a couple hundred yards of the tower.
Right. So that'll be interesting to see. They're already advertising here in America. Obviously, Verizon has it. Who else? T-Mobile, AT&T. I'm sure they're all pushing the limits or trying to get as many people onto a 5G phone. Do you have a 5G phone, Andy, by any chance?
I don't, not yet.
Yeah. It's about 1,000 feet.
It's about 1,000 feet. Feet, not meters, not yards.
Yeah.
Okay.
I literally have one in the road, right outside the road, right outside my office here, and I'm toying with the idea.
Yeah.
Of getting hooked
Now
up.
4G compared to, what does that say, 10 miles?
Well,
That's pretty, 10 miles versus 1,000 feet.
Well, guys, I appreciate you joining. My answer to your message there, Chris, is I think that's going to make it more reliable, more important, more devices, more content, more Internet of Things, higher definition. At the same time, what Seb's doing here is helping us troubleshoot when it's not right, and it'll only become more and more important to know how to detect when it's not right.
Absolutely.
exactly.
I'll give a great example of a guy that works for me. He was telling me the other day that his car, his BMW for that matter, when he drives in the rain, slows down automatically. And there's something about a sensor that's getting fooled into thinking that the car's out of control. That's awesome that it does that, but now he's got yet another thing to try to troubleshoot and figure out why is this happening.
And how to disable it, please?
How to disable it?
Yeah, please. Yeah. I don't want that my car just slow me down because it's raining.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, cars are going to get smarter, which means when they're wrong, they're dumber.
Yeah, I remember when I had was the last year, actually maybe a year or so ago, before the lockdown, I had one of these cars where it's the first time it had the lane correction. So I'm driving, I'm going around a curve, and I feel like my steering wheel moving, and I'm like, I'm not touching, what's going on here? And then I looked and I saw this little light on, and I realized it's sensing the lanes and turning the wheel for me. I was like, holy crap, how do I turn that off? Or how do I? So that was a weird feeling, because I thought something was going on. And the same thing with the auto braking, right? I mean, I've had that also occur where it breaks all of a sudden for you because it senses, something ahead of you, and maybe you're not hitting the brake as fast enough or whatever. So,
well, keep in mind, every time you fly on a plane, for the most part, the pilot's not flying the plane.
absolutely. That's been true for a while now, right? I remember sitting down talking to a pilot, and he was, commuting, and I said, so when does the pilot actually do their job? He's like, just mainly on takeoff, and I said the planes are smart enough to land. I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah.
I don't want to. That's enough. I don't want to know anymore.
I don't want to be the software developer who is creating that kind of algorithm, because if I make it just a little mistake somewhere, I'm responsible for the death of thousands of people. I don't know. I wouldn't feel really, really comfortable with that idea.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Keep in mind, it's human beings that are writing this code. Now, it's really smart, and maybe it's self-healing and adapting, but it's still the human being that's writing the code, and that human being may not ever fly on that plane.
Yeah.
Here's a great example. I got a smart speaker from my office a couple months ago, and I was all excited about it. It sounds great, but it was so smart that it would turn itself off in between usage. It would turn itself off even in between like a break in the action, the dialogue, because it was really intended for music, and it's trying to save the battery and trying to save power. And if somebody were to answer me in a one-word answer, I couldn't hear it because it was turned off, and it had to wake itself up every time. I went months trying to troubleshoot stuff, only to realize my smart speaker was too smart.
That's a great story.
And maybe it wasn't months, but I was blaming everything. Everybody else blamed my PC and everything. I'm like, wait a minute, it can't be that. So I took a free speaker from one of the conferences, plugged it in, my problems went away. I solved it with a free IGEL speaker from a giveaway at a conference booth. True story. Well, gentlemen, thanks for joining. As always great to catch up, always great to learn, always great to evolve. Hopefully our listeners are getting value out of this. Hopefully we can get them to share the podcast with others in our space. Seb, I appreciate you putting the effort into writing that blog and reviewing it with us.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak about that.
Chris, anything you want to bring up before we let the listeners go?
No, I think we're good. Enjoyed it today. Thank you.
Seb, anything going on in your world and in your IGEL community that you'd want to get out there via this medium?
Yes, Doug is on vacation this week, and he is activer than ever. I guess he would be less active. He would be on duty this week. So if you have something to post that Doug shouldn't see, you might try to post it this week, but I'm pretty sure you will see it.
Has Doug sent you a picture from laying on the beach in the Mediterranean somewhere?
When I guess you would have sent it out to me, it would be a virtual background, because we still have a kind of lockdown here in Germany. So the only beach you might want to reach is somewhere in Berlin, so not the real beach.
I'm just envisioning. I don't know what I'm envisioning with that one, but
no,
we'll see today.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
All right, we like picking on Doug. Doug's a fun guy. If you've never met him in person, maybe we can do an IGEL weekly meetup when we finally get to go to a few conferences. That'll be fun.
Sure.
All right, gentlemen, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Take care.
See you.